Monday, work. Tuesday, work. Wednesday, work. Thursday, work. Friday, work. Saturday, work. Sunday, work. Repeat. Monday, work. Tuesday, work. Wednesday, work. Thursday, work. Friday, work. Saturday, work. Sunday, work. Repeat, 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 and repeat. This is the rhythm of our lives. Until what? Until when? We repeat. Over and over and over, we work. The commandment that we are centering our time on today is commandment number 4. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For the last couple of weeks, we've been dealing with the 10 Commandments, and we've been looking at the first tablet of commands, the tablets that deal with our relationship with God. So the first week we heard have no other gods, and then no idols. Last week, Pastor Hap and Pastor Ruth talked about not taking the Lord's name in vain, and today we get to the fourth one, which is to honor the Sabbath. You know, it seems to take a shift here at this moment. You know, we're first talking about God, and this one, the Sabbath, how does it deal with God, right? It's not about our worship of God. It's not about how we deal with God's name. So how do we deal with the fourth command? That it happens to still be on the first tablet of commands. The second 6 deal with our relationship with one another. We're just right now looking at our relationship with God. I think the fourth commandment is a hinge. It's a hinge between how we worship God and how we love one another. It's a hinge that I think we have to deal with, and I think it has to have special attention. You know, I've had communication and conversation with some of you about this command, and I'm really excited to really delve in with you all this morning. But let's break down this commandment for a moment, and we're going to read through it and listen to it as if we were the Israelites. You know, we're going to get to our Sabbath in a moment. We're going to talk about us. But right now, let's just focus on what Sabbath rest must have meant for the persons hearing these words. So the initial words we hear is, remember the Sabbath day. In the very beginning, the Israelites are told to remember. Now this is a positive action, right? The other 3 was, thou shalt have no other gods, don't take the Lord's name in vain. The other 6 are about, don't kill, don't murder, those kind of things. But this one, it just says, remember. Remember the Sabbath day. Like we remember at Holy Communion, when we have communion once a month, we remember what God has done through Jesus Christ, what he did with the Last Supper, but we are to remember. So we can ask ourselves, but what are they to remember? But Jesus, or God, keeps on going. He says, remember the Sabbath day, and then to keep it holy. So the Israelites thus far have just heard, remember this day, and now keep it holy. But then he kind of tells us what he wants us to do, and then I think he says 3 actions. He explains it in 3 different ways. So let's look through the 3 ways for a moment. The first thing he says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And then verse 9 states this, 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work. So what we have is a legitimate call to work. We work for 6 days. We're not to be lazy. We're not to take time off. We are to work for 6 legitimate days. And what it says, and I love this, you shall do all of your work in those 6 days, right? So you're to work, but to do all of it, whatever you have to do in 6 days. That's the first thing they hear. The second thing they hear in verse 10 is this. But the 7th day is the Sabbath day to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien residents in your town. So we're to work for 6 long days, and then on the 7th day, it's to be a Sabbath day. You know, just like we're told to do all of our work in 6 days, the text says everyone, not some, everyone is to take the 7th day off. You, your children, your livestock even. I mean, that's just a weird thing to think about. But everyone is to take a day off. And then we hear this motivational clause from God in verse 11. For in 6 days the Lord, God, made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and honored it and consecrated it. So now, We hear a little bit about God. We're taken back. The Israelites, as they're hearing these words, are taken back to the very beginning of the Old Testament, the very beginning of Genesis 1. And they're remembering how God made the creation, how God made the earth. For 6 days, God created. He created the earth, the heavens, the waters, the animals, everything for 6 days. And then what did he do on the seventh day? He rested. Now, do we say 6 days of creation, or do we say 7 days of creation? What do we say? 6? But I think we should say 7 days of creation. Why should we say 7 days of creation? Because God was intentional about the seventh day of his life, of his work, was to rest. That we don't take just the first 6, it's 7 full days, so God did all of his work in 6. But on the seventh day, God rested. So what I hear already in these words is that we're to work really hard for 6 days, and that there should be a complete and comprehensive work stoppage. What's interesting, there's no worship mentioned here, right? We often equate Sabbath with worship, don't we? And on the Sabbath day, we're to worship, but we don't hear that in this command. All we're told is to not work. And the way in which we're supposed to acknowledge that is by to keep it holy, special, unique, and to separate it from all the other days. All the other days are marked by productivity, by activity, performance, self-security, all these other things. But this seventh day is a day that's unlike all the other 6. And we hear that this is a required act of all. But I think what is being communicated here is this: that Israel rest because God rests. This is the third clause of that, was that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, but a part of those days is that on the seventh day, God rested. So if God is to rest, the Israelites are to rest. And what I kind of hear is that God is not a workaholic, or God does not need to do more things to secure himself, to be more sufficient, to be more in control, or to be even noticed. That in the very DNA of creation, there was this intentional, set-apart day for rest. Yet I'm convinced that this must have been a new and interesting thing for the Israelites. So we have to remember, where did the Israelites just come from when they got these 10 commandments? Where were they? They were in Egypt. And what were they doing in Egypt? Slavery. Is slavery marked by rest? No. Slavery is marked by productivity. Work. 7 days a week, 52 weeks in a year. These people had little to no concept of rest. It wasn't even in their DNA for years. Even though the world was created that way, in this moment in their history, rest was not a part of it. So as God was beginning this new relationship with his people, I think he gave them a gift. A gift to his people by saying, work hard like you have for 6 days, but on the seventh day, do something different. So we hear God, the beginning, say that we are to remember. Remember the way that I created the world. Remember how it all started in this moment, because it's probably not in your custom. But then if we move away from the 10 Commandments for a moment, and we go a little further in the book of Exodus, to chapter 31, we hear a little bit more about the Sabbath law that God had consecrated. And here now these words from Exodus 31, beginning at verse 12. The Lord said to Moses, "You yourself are to speak to the Israelites. You shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations. Given in order that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath, because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. Whoever does any work on it shall be cut off from among the people. 6 days shall work be done, and the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. Therefore the Israelites shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel, that in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth. On the seventh day he rested and was refreshed." There's some interesting words, but it starts, the first thing in the 10 Commandments is the Sabbath we're to remember. And here I think what is happening is Sabbath is also a sign between God and God's covenant with God's people. Sabbath is given that people will know him and to keep it holy. It's a sign of creation, the sign of how God created his people, and now it's part of the covenant. It's interesting because we hear in this moment that if someone does not keep the Sabbath, they're what? They're to be put to death. It's interesting how this is part of this thing. But Sabbath is something that we should remember, and it's a sign of God's covenant with us. So let's move to the New Testament a little bit. What does Sabbath rest look like for us now, or in light of the New Testament? There are two scriptures that I want to read right away, one from Colossians and one from Romans, that both deal with the word Sabbath. We'll start with Colossians 2, the 16th verse. This is what it says. Therefore, do not let anyone condemn you in matters of food and drink, or observing festivals, new moons, or Sabbaths. Let me say that again. Therefore, let no one or anyone condemn you in matters of food and drink, or of observing festivals, new moons, or Sabbaths. These are only a shadow of what is to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. And in Romans chapter 14, some judge one day to be better than another, while others judge all days to be alike. Let all be fully convinced in their own minds. Those who observe the day, observe it in the honor of the Lord. And those who eat, eat in the honor of the Lord, since they give thanks to God. While those who abstain, abstain in honor of the Lord, and give thanks to God. We do not live to ourselves, and we do not die to ourselves. So these are two interesting things. I think the first one is that we hear that Sabbath is something that should be practiced in principle. And that Sabbath is only a principle or a shadow of what is to come, as Colossians tells us. And what is to come? That ultimate rest, that ultimate peace that we will have when we are one day with God in heaven, whatever that looks like. Whether we die or whether Jesus comes again, Sabbath is only a shadow of what is to come. But then also, as Romans tells us, there should be grace. Some judge that one day should be better than another, while others judge that all days should be alike. But let all be fully convinced in their own minds. So I think there's something about grace and not legalism here in this Sabbath talk. So, right now, before we go any further, I don't want us to get hung up about a day yet. About even how we choose to do something on that day yet. But let us first remember why Sabbath would be so important for us now, and why God would still think that Sabbath is an appropriate thing. So why would anyone Sabbath? The first easy answer is that it is part of God's desire for us from the very beginning, right? God said we should Sabbath, so we should Sabbath, right? That's the first silly reason, or pretty serious reason. But number two, I think, is this. Why would someone Sabbath? I think Sabbath is choosing to intentionally not be productive, where one can claim that God is enough. That God is enough, and on the seventh day, we will choose to find God. And I love this. I'm going to tell you a story in a little bit, but when God gave the Ten Commandments to the Israelites, they were in the middle of the wilderness, right? And at one part in the middle of the wilderness, they were asking for food and drink, weren't they? So God sent down manna and quail. But what did they try to do? God said, I will give you enough manna for today. But what did they do? They stored up, they hoarded it. And what happened to the manna the next day? It rotted and molded, right? And so there's this claim that we're to hold up and keep enough for us, that even on the day of the Lord, that God would provide for us. And so we work 7 days a week, maybe believing that God will provide for us if we take time off, if we don't rest. And so we remember the Sabbath. Why is it important? Because God will care for us every day of the week, including the day that we don't work, which means a day that we don't earn income, a day that we're not being productive in anything that we do. So as we begin to look at this even more, I'm not sure the Sabbath, even though this may be countercultural for us, I don't know if Sabbath is about devising a system of restrictions or even bringing back what I just learned about a couple of months ago, which are the blue laws. I'm not sure if that's what it's all about. And I'm not even sure if Sabbath is really about worshiping on Sunday mornings or what we cannot do on a Sunday. And it's even difficult to claim that Sunday is the Sabbath day. Why is it hard to claim that Sunday is a Sabbath day for all? Because people work on Sundays. I work on Sundays. And apparently in Connor, I only work on Sundays. Right? But also, police officers, firemen, military personnel, waitresses and waiters at the restaurants that we all love. You and me, we eat there on a Sunday afternoon. So be very careful with how we speak about them because there's contradictions already, right? We patronize these restaurants. I work. There are people who can't be here because they have to work. So I don't know if Sabbath's about any of those things. And I've actually loved the conversations that I've had with some of you. And I'm going to pick on Bobby Norris for a moment, but I told him I was going to do this. Because Bobby and I have had a lot of conversations over the last year about Sabbath day, right? A lot of intentional conversations about what we can and what we can't do. And he has pretty good stories about what's happened to him if he's worked on a Sunday, right? So if you don't know what not to do on a Sabbath, talk to Bobby Norris. Because he has some really good stories, including falling off a roof once, right? But I think it needs to be an intentional conversation. So this is how I would define Sabbath. Sabbath concerns the periodic, disciplined, regular disengagement from the systems of productivity, whereby the world uses people up to exhaustion. What does that mean? Sabbath deals with the intentional time of disengagement from doing anything, or doing anything that is productive, whereby the world tries to lead us up to exhaustion. So I think the deeper issue I think for us is that we don't have patterns in our life to help us break away from the normal routines of a long week. I think the Sabbath practice is not about taking anything on for us, but requires the intention of breaking down the rhythms of our busy week throughout the week. Sabbath must entail the termination of tasks that get in our way. And I think Sabbath is more important about taking Sabbath than about when someone Sabbaths. Because we don't even do it well already, so we should be concerned about what day it is, but rather that people are choosing to rest. But Sabbath, I think, is really counterintuitive for us. Because we think the more we have to do, the harder and more we should work, right? When the to-do list is longer, we feel the more we have to do. But I think the more we work, the more we have to rest. One man challenged another to an all-day wood chopping contest. The challenger worked very hard, stopping for only a brief period of lunch. The other man, who started the challenge, had a leisurely lunch, took several breaks throughout the day. At the end of the day, the challenger was surprised and annoyed to find that the other fellow had chopped substantially more wood than he had. And this is what he said: "I don't get it. Every time I checked, you were taking a rest. Yet you chopped more wood than I did." And then the winning woodsman said this: "But what you didn't notice was that I was sharpening my axe when I sat down to rest." And I wonder if that's the same way for us as well. And I see that in my own work as well. If I have a long list of things to do, it's better for me not even to try at all than to work through my long list. Then I need to disengage and take a long walk or do something to clear my brain, to maybe sharpen my axe, so that when I go back to do some work, I can be clear. John Wesley, one of the founders of the United Methodist Church, believed that if he had much to do, he had anything to do, he spent more hours in prayer to accomplish it all. He stated this: "Every man needs 30 minutes of prayer daily, but when he's busy, he needs 1 hour." God worked for 6 long days, but what he did most of the end was to rest, so that when day 1 began again, he was clear, he was rested, he was refreshed. I think Sabbath as Christians, that we go on and on, even in Christian leadership, maybe even in our church, with our leaders of our church, we stay busy trying to build up the kingdom of God, going. But I wonder if more Christians and Christian leaders would also need seasons of rest, to breathe and to slow down. After my second year of seminary, I actually took 6 months off of seminary. I don't know if you know that, but I took an entire semester off of seminary. It was after my 3rd semester, and one day, it was in November of a couple of years ago, I don't remember now, but I got to a point, I was working at this church, as a pastor then of dogs. And there was a lot of great things happening, but it was a large church, and things were just going, and it never seemed to rest. And I was also a full-time student. So I was commuting from Harrisburg. I was in BC more than I am now, and it was just a lot. And so one day I was like, why am I doing this, right? I was meeting with a DS, and I was like, I just need a break. So what I did was at the end of that December, I quit. I quit the job that I had loved. And I even took some time off the seminary. And I'll tell you that first month that I chose not to work at all. I had saved up enough money. I had planned well to not work for a little while. And all I did was this. I woke up and I spent time in prayer every day. So for 6 months, I worked 2 part-time jobs in the community just to pay my bills, not to save up for a house, but really just to pay my bills. And guess what? I have fond memories of those 6 months. That for 6 months, I didn't feel the burden, the call, the craziness of church ministry or even seminary. But for 6 months, I took Sabbath rest. And then, when I came back from that, I came to you. And so July 1 was my first church appointment in over 6 months. But what it did for me was make me refreshed. So when I got here, I felt fresh and ready to go. And I still feel that. And I wonder if that's what this is all about. It's less about the legalism of one day, but more about how do we incorporate more rest in our life. Well, let's continue this thing. Because Hebrews 4 has some really wise words to talk about rest. Let's hear these words of Hebrews 4. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest is still open, let us take care that none of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For indeed the good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them because they were not united by faith with those who listened. For we have believed, enter that rest. For we who have believed enter that rest, just as God has said, as in my anger I swore, they shall not enter my rest. Though his works were finished as the foundation of the world. For in one place it speaks about the seventh day as follows, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again in this place it says, they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains open for some to enter, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience. Again, he sets a certain day, today, saying through David much later in these words also quoted, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God will not speak later about another day. I think this is the key part. So then, a Sabbath rest still remains for the people of God. For those who enter God's rest also cease from their labors as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one may fall through such obedience as theirs. So what does that basically say? What I hear it saying is, should we be less concerned about Sabbath day, but more about Sabbath rest, maybe even daily? How do we achieve freedom? Freedom from our slavery, freedom from our sin, the very things that this command were written about to remove us from it. And what he says is that we must enter God's rest. I think freedom rule number 4 for us is that we should enter God's rest. God invites us to rest. We do not have to fear of being called lazy. We don't have to be fearing of feeling guilty. Why? Because God created the world in 6 days, and God chose to rest on the 7th. If God needs to rest, behold, I think you and I, we need to rest. So I'm not going to tell you what day to Sabbath. I'm not. But I don't want to limit it either. Maybe we need more than just a day of Sabbath. Maybe we need seasons of Sabbath. Because a season of saying no to other people and to activities and productivity is always a yes to God. If an entire day may seem impossible for us to do nothing, maybe we should start with an evening or an afternoon, or maybe even a morning. But we have to start somewhere. Time to rest, time to pause from the routines. But at the minimum, what if we all just took one day every week where we put aside our work, and all we did was rest in God's presence? Maybe we need one day every week to remind us that we are not in control. But guys, maybe we need one day every week to remember that we do not bow down to the God of our work or the God of our paycheck. But we bow down solely to the one true God. A day to realize that life isn't about us and what we can accomplish, but rather a day to realize that God is enough for you and for me. I think that's how it connects to the first three commandments. Let's pray. God, in the midst of this silence, in the midst of this peace, in the midst of this time, and God, we just enter your presence. And know that all you want from us is not our work, but after our time of productivity and work, that all you want from us, God, is to be in prayer, and to be in rest, and to whatever it will take for us to be with you. It will look different in all of us, oh God, but it's ultimately about being in worship with you. God, thank you for the 10 Commandments. Thank you for giving us a guide to be free, so we can be free to worship you and free from the distractions of this world. Be with us, oh God.